Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined with the founder and CEO of Fort Capital, Chris Powers. Fort Capital is a real estate investment firm having completed more than $2.1 billion in real estate transactions in Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. He's also the host of the Fort podcast, a show about entrepreneurship where each episode's mission is to up your game by hearing directly from men and women in the arena. And certainly, Chris, you are one of the men in the arena. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Of course. No, I appreciate you coming on. So, the intro that I just gave is a little bit, very high level. Can you give us some more information about you? A little bit more intro, a little more depth?
Yeah. Born and raised in Texas. I was born in El Paso, Texas, and moved to Fort Worth in 2004. Started my business then, Fort Capital, which you gave a great intro over, but we are a real estate investment firm focused on buying Class B industrial throughout Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. We have over 50 employees across 4 offices in Texas, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and Fort Worth. And we've built a really incredible company. I'm married. I have 3 young children, 2 daughters and a son, 7, 5, and 2. And I'm just very fortunate to get to do what I do.
Yeah. And I guess you started in 2004 before the kids were born, but certainly that's probably the motivation nowadays.
Yeah, it helps.
So what is you mentioned, I think it was Class B industrial. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
What is that? What is Class B industrial?
Class B is typically a denomination of when the product was built. So these are buildings that were built, call it from the 70s to the late 90s, early 2000s. They're typically infill in nature, which means if you're driving around a city, they're built in the more mature neighborhoods, really because of when they were built 30, 40 years ago. That might have been on the outskirts of town. Now it's in the center of town. And so they service really dense trade areas. They're hard to replicate. It's hard to find land to rebuild them. And so, we're in a world now where the supply that you see today is kind of the supply that we're probably going to have forever. And then we buy shallow bay, kind of light industrial. So a lot of people think of industrial and they think of big Amazon facilities that are 1 million square feet. A lot of the stuff that we buy is 5,000 to 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet spaces that are servicing the more small to medium sized businesses that need a couple thousand feet of office and an 8,000 square foot warehouse. And these are your local service providers and businesses like that.
Yeah. Why is you said it caught my attention. The supply that we see today is likely the supply we'll have forever. Why is that? Is it because of location?
Yeah. So it's location. So it's a few things. One, these are single story buildings. And so to build them in a way where you could add any meaningful amount of supply, you would need a ton of land. And so if you go into these major cities and we buy in major markets, to find 10 or 15 acres in the middle of a city that hasn't been built on is getting rarer and rarer. If there is 10 or 15 acres, a lot of cities are going to want to see that be a much higher and better use, both for tax base and things of that nature. And so building a brand new industrial complex in the middle of the city isn't as advantageous. And assuming you could find the land and you could find a city that wanted to see industrial, just the cost to rebuild it today with where building costs have gone, make it a lot less advantageous to create any kind of competing supply. And so if you really kind of look at the market for this shallow bay industrial in the infill of cities over the last couple decades, the amount of new product is almost non-existent. And the flip side to that is for everything that is built, if you go to these major cities, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, a lot of this stuff, if you go to these gentrifying areas or areas where there's all this new development, a lot of it is old industrial parks where industrial buildings have been knocked down or they've been repurposed to be cool restaurants or entertainment or things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I guess my answer is even if you were able to build a couple 100,000 feet, a lot of times you're seeing it getting taken out of the system somewhere else. So the net the net new supply in any market stays zero or negative in the major markets.
Yeah, that makes sense. That I know that the city of Austin doesn't have a whole lot of interest in building new industrial stuff within the
No,
core. No, of
they do
course not.
not.
So I mean, I'm kind of curious, what attracts someone to your line of work? I mean, I've thought about a lot of dream jobs and stuff like that, and I what brought you to doing this sort of real estate investment in 2004? Like, what attracted you to that?
Yeah, I think I'm more of an entrepreneur. So I was 17 years old when I bought my first rental house, and that was my freshman year at TCU. I had a couple businesses throughout high school.
Why? Hold on. You got a rental house at 17 years old. That's a great. I mean, I've thought, man, I wish that I had a rental house when I was 17, and sort of what I would do with that now. How did that come about?
Well, I was an entrepreneur in high school. So I had a business that bought golf clubs from my friends. I was on the golf team
Okay.
and I'd sell them on eBay, which at the time that was a more novel idea than you would think of it as today. And then I had a car washing kind of lawn mowing business where I'd wash cars and mow lawns around the neighborhood. And then when I got to TCU, um, was very fortunate, but I needed to make some more money than what my allowance was giving me, and be able to kind of do things like go on spring break and other things. And
Sure.
like I've done my whole life, I think one of the things that I've been very fortunate is I've always been surrounded by great people that didn't really want to see me fail and were willing to help me out. And I picked up the school newspaper right when I got there. I was like, I need to figure out a business that's making more than like $8 an hour. I need some quote unquote real money. And I looked at the school newspaper, and there was a friend of mine who literally just texted me 5 minutes ago. We've been friends for 20 years, and he had just won Entrepreneur of the Year at TCU, and he was a sophomore that was buying rental properties. And so I went and I sought him out. We went to a Chipotle down on Hewlin, which is a major street here in Fort Worth. And he was like, this is how I'm doing it. And at the time, you have to go back to 2004. This was pre-Great Financial Crisis. You were able to get loans with virtually zero money down and not a whole lot of credit or, history or balance sheet.
Yeah.
And so I read a few books. I followed his plan, went down to Countrywide, which was a big lender back then that's no longer around, and got a loan with virtually zero down. It was 3% down, 6% cash back at closing. Bought a rental house right next to TCU, leased it to some students, and the rest was history.
You still have that rental property?
I held it for a long time. People ask me that. I held it till probably 2016, so about 12 years, and I sold it I honestly should have. If I'd kept holding it, it kept going up and up. But
Sure.
it was a nice return, and it was a great way to start.
Yeah, of course. So, what do you think makes you successful in sort of what you do?
Yeah, real estate's not terribly difficult. I
don't
think
think you're
what
supposed to
makes
say that. You're supposed to say it's the hardest thing in the world, and I'm the only one that can do it.
I'll say this, it's not a difficult concept. I
Sure.
think to do what we do really well is very difficult. It's just like all things. It's 1,000 little things that you do well every day. But I think, look, we've been successful. We have a great team. We understand over time, we've had a lot of opportunity to make lots of mistakes and learn from them. Real estate is a game of like, what is your all-in cost and what's your cost to lease? And so what that means is, if I was going to buy a building from you, I would know the day I closed what my cost of the building was. And then let's just say it was a vacant building and I had to get it leased up. I'd have to project how much is it going to cost to lease it? So how much, interest am I going to have to pay while it sits vacant? How much am I going to have to pay for marketing? How much am I going to have to pay in the leasing commissions?
Yeah.
How much am I going to have to pay in tenant build out? And that's my all-in cost. And so I just have to weigh what's my all-in cost, what's my cost to lease, and that's going to produce some type of return. Now that's it at the easiest scale. Obviously, if it was easy to pull off, more people would do it.
Yeah.
Not over leveraging properties, and staying relatively conservative. And look, being in Texas and being in the markets we're in, where there's a lot of population growth and demand, make them markets that are great to play in. They're also less regulated by the government. You kind of see what happens in a lot of these coastal states, where government regulation has gotten overbearing and you have rent control and it's impossible to get permitting and everything is just way more difficult. Texas and Florida specifically, and some of the other Sun Belt states that we're in are just less regulated, and it's a lot easier to be an entrepreneur in those states.
Sure. So, I mean, on your podcast, the Fort podcast, like I said at the beginning, you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. Um, yeah, and you've certainly had a lot of big ones on there. So, and being one yourself, is there a common thread that you've sort of picked up on with all of these people, these entrepreneurs, to be as successful as they are?
Yeah, I think their default optimism. I think the world today is, if you pick up the media or you pick up a piece of a newspaper or read an article, it's mainly like just negative stuff all day. We
Yeah.
don't celebrate optimism the way we used to. And America's like been built on optimism. And I think you talk to any great entrepreneur, and that's not blind optimism. That's not that they're not thinking about risks and thinking about the playing field, but their default is to be optimistic and not to be kind of a pessimist. So that's probably one. They have an incredible amount of durability and grit. And so they can just deal like you read the headlines often, making entrepreneurs sound very glamorous. You actually
Sure.
talk to an entrepreneur. It's a million little boring things that you do for the one big headline that you might get one day or the one cool thing that you do. And it's being able to kind of wake up and do boring things consistently over time and kind of stay in the game. And so
Yeah.
they're just always in the game and they're just resilient. And there's no one way to do it. I could talk on, but there's not one way to be successful. I've had almost 400 episodes, and I could probably tell you 70 different stories of how somebody got to where they got to. And I think we like to think of things in textbooks, like if I just read this book and I do this thing, then I'll be successful. Is like the good news is, yes, that's one way, and the better news is there's 100 other ways.
Yeah. Where does failure come into play?
Failure would come into play with.
You talk about grit and sticking to it and like doing all those little small things, but is failure
Yeah,
part of this?
for sure. I think all of these people, and again, it's kind of a cliche statement, but it's because it's true, is like all these people learn from failure. Like the failure doesn't define them. It's almost like fuel to get better because they understand that failure is like a given. You are going to fail at something. It could be something small. Hopefully it's not something big, but most of them use it as an opportunity to learn. I've certainly have. I've screwed up a million times and I'll screw up more.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of that is a lot of it often comes from being willing to take risk. And so, I often tell our team, I'm like, if everything's always going perfect and we're never screwing up, we've pretty much become static. We're not really pushing the limit anymore.
Yeah.
And so, we could talk about the biggest companies in the world that people know about, Amazon, Apple. They're constantly failing at these new ideas and they're learning and improvising. We get to use the products that made it, but there's 100 products they tried that didn't.
Yeah.
And again, they're more of an innovative company, but it's just a good reminder that even the biggest companies sometimes fail. And I think Elon Musk had a quote on Twitter yesterday. He was like, if my team isn't failing often, we're not innovating or taking enough risk to be better for the future.
Yeah. And certainly at that scale, they could fail on $1 billion project, but the project that succeeds is $100 billion.
For sure.
So it makes up. So, we're talking about, Fort Capital, and you'll have completed more than $2.1 billion in real estate transactions. Certainly negotiating is part of that achieving that number.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people have negotiated a lot of massive deals like that. I'm curious what the biggest deal that you've negotiated was. I mean, I don't know how much particulars you could go into, but sort of what was the ballpark range of that, and how does it feel negotiating that large number, and how does it feel when it's done?
Largest deal we've done is north of 100 million, single transaction. That was a big portfolio. Negotiating are fun. And again, it's always kind of knowing what the other side wants. And look, a lot of the times what the other side wants, especially when you're trading real estate, is a price, or they want a quick close, or they want a surety to close, or it could be any one of those things. Sometimes when you're selling a company that has lots of employees, there's more emotional factors in it. When you're selling a piece of real estate, you're not really selling. I'd say the impact on human beings is much less if I'm just, selling you a building. If I was selling you my company with 50 people, I might care a lot more about the future of my people's happiness, and are they going to have growth opportunities? Or so there's a lot more that comes into, I think, negotiating the sale of a business sometimes than real estate. Real estate's more about, what are you paying me? Sometimes it's like, what are you going to do with the property once you buy it? If it's somebody that's owned it a long time, they may care a lot about the future of the property.
Yeah.
You'd be shocked how many. Now in industrial, probably not as much, but prior to that, we were infill developers. So we were developing land inside the city. And I remember a sweet lady that had owned a piece for like 60 years. And she was just really passionate that whoever she sold it to would do X, Y, and Z in the future.
Yeah.
So I think the lesson is like finding out what the seller wants. Sometimes it's nothing magical, and working to a solution that they can get what they want and we can get what we want. And I would say the bigger the deal, actually, sometimes it's easier to do bigger deals than small deals. And I say that because when the deals are bigger, the resources to pay people throughout the deal are bigger. So better attorneys, better brokers, better owners, maybe not better, more sophisticated. If you're doing a really small deal, you can't really afford a big attorney. Maybe the types of brokers working on it are more junior to the industry, so that's why they're working on smaller deals. So it's just a little more complex. So often negotiations are easier the bigger the deal gets than the smaller the deal is.
Yeah. I wonder if there's also maybe a proportionality to that. A $100 million deal, I don't know, you lose 1%. Yeah, it's not great, but 1% off of $100,000 deal is a lot more impactful, maybe like to someone that doesn't have a lot, right? So anyhow, so let's switch gears a little bit to the Texas economy.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Texas economy? How are things doing? I mean, there's so much outside of, obviously there's macroeconomic and microeconomic things going on, but you're in the business world, you're an entrepreneur. How do you feel it's going?
Yeah, I don't want to, toot my own horn or my own book. I think we live in arguably one of the best economies, if not the best economy in the world. We have pretty much everything you could want. We have rail, we have a great port, we have border trade with Mexico. So just from a goods in and out and manufacturing and jobs, we have a lot to be said there. We have a relatively low cost of living, although that's gone up more the last decade as more people have moved in. We have people moving in from all over the country, not just individuals. Fortune 500 is moving into Austin and DFW and Houston. Houston has one of the best medical systems in the world, so you have a lot coming in there. We have NASA and SpaceX and a lot of what's going on in space, which has become a much bigger deal over the last decade. We have a great flourishing oil and gas industry. The Permian Basin, arguably the most prolific oil and gas producer in the country. We have a great we have a great access to power, deregulated, as you think about what's going to happen with AI and crypto and the need for all this energy. And so we have that here. And we have an amazing culture. We're, again, not a political statement, but we just have a low regulated state. Texans love Texas. And so you just have people that are very passionate about their state. They still have a lot of old time values of, just being polite and, helping out your neighbor and not taking life terribly seriously. And so you kind of take all that into consideration. It creates a perfect environment, especially for commerce and business. And so, long term couldn't be more bullish. I don't know what'll happen over, the next couple of years or in short periods of time, but it's setting up really well. And then I'll go back to the border for a second. Go ahead.
No, I said please.
Yeah, as globalization or as deglobalization, I guess is occurring, which we've seen that trend, and our dependency on China and some of these other foreign nations. Mexico offers one of the best places, and so just had a gentleman the other day on my podcast who's very in the know and said basically every corporation on the planet is trying to move manufacturing to Mexico. And that flows right up into America, and that comes through Texas. And so I think as you look at the next 20 years, as the world reshapes itself, Mexico will become even more important. Our relationship with Mexico will be more important, and that's going to have a direct impact right here in the home state of Texas.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd not heard that before, but of course, I'm not an expert on manufacturing, so I'm not surprised I haven't heard that. But why did he mention why people would be looking to get out of places like China or Southeast Asia? Why Mexico?
Yeah, I think China's not necessarily the lowest cost producer anymore. They do have a lot of talent, but they're not necessarily the lowest cost producer. I think our relationship with China, I mean, again, I'm not a foreign expert, but it's been somewhat strained over the last 8 years.
Sure.
It's gotten worse, not better, or at least that's what we're told. Mexico is our neighbor. They're just to the south. They have an incredible population. They have a very great work ethic. They have a great environment to do this type of work. It's right to the south of America, which we consume a lot. Americans are consumers. And so it creates a great landscape with, I think, a lot less geopolitical risk baked into it.
Yeah. So as I was going to ask you sort of about Texas is often seen as an economic miracle, right? And are we poised to stay that way? And you said that you're bullish on long term, short and medium. There might be some hiccups along the way. But some people sort of see the way that cities are changing. I guess the Texas legislature passing that Death Star bill, trying to decrease regulation on that the cities are imposing, making business more I guess easier to do business. Are there other things that you see that the Texas legislature or the Texas economy, Texas politicians can do to prevent, as more people move in from other places and bringing that sort of, we want that bureaucracy. We want we want more regulations. What can they do to prevent that?
I'll be honest, I don't have a great answer. Besides,
Okay.
don't let those people come to Texas. That's not the right answer, though. What's funny to me is the amount of people I've met, even since COVID, where there was a great migration of people from a lot of California, but a lot of what I'd call blue states, my conversations with them when they get here is, one, they're just like so surprised that people live this way in a very positive way.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're converted, but the amount of conversations I've had that's like, when you're in your world, you kind of think that that's how the world works, even though you hear other things. And then you go to another environment, you actually get to experience it. And it's been overwhelmingly, positive conversations. Now, I don't know that means they're going to vote one way or the other, but I've been shocked how many people get here and they're like, I just never could have imagined. It's awesome. And the way people are treated, and it's better to have less regulation. Now, again, I don't know what that means, and I don't have the solution. I think the one thing that I think makes markets better is the cost of living. And so from a real estate perspective, I would encourage politicians and those powers that be to do their best to continue to let housing get built, let things become more affordable. Even in Texas, it doesn't matter where you are in the country. You talk to developers 40, 50 years ago, it was just easier to build stuff. There wasn't all this permitting and all this extra stuff that had to go on. Projects didn't take as long to build. They were more affordable. They weren't as complex. And, in Texas, it can take a few years to build housing, but you get to some of these other states in the country. I talked to developers, they're in a project for 7 or 8 years before they've developed the housing that they thought. And that's just not sustainable long term, and it creates a lot of issues. If people can't afford housing, that's not great. It screws up school systems. Like, it has a lot of ripple effects of how unaffordable housing screws things up over time. And so one way to make the majority of people happy in this state is to keep it affordable.
Yeah, I want to focus a little bit on the state of the real estate economy in Texas, because that's sort of your area of expertise. And after that, we can talk about the lawsuit that I guess you are currently in. So the real estate market, and this is, you have a lot more in-depth knowledge than I do about real estate generally, but certainly business or industrial real estate. But the housing market, which you've touched on now, I don't know. Is it correct right now? Are we in for a correction? Is it going to go like, what do you see happening? Everyone's talking about, the interest rates, right? Are they going to go down? And if they do go down, what happens then? I'm just curious what you think from your expertise.
Yeah, so in the industrial world, it's been a little bit of an interesting dynamic because the actual assets themselves in the market has performed relatively well. What we have is an interest rate capital markets problem. It's math.
Yeah.
It's they haven't done well enough to absorb interest rates increasing almost 500% in 2 years,
Yeah.
but they have done well. Then you take something like office, where it's like interest rates are up, occupancy's down, rents are falling, vacancies going up. That's a perfect storm for a disaster.
Yeah.
You look at retail, retail's performed extremely well. You look at, uh, I'm going through the big four. You look at housing. We can talk about housing specifically. It depends where you are in the housing. So if you're talking about like uber luxury, where the uber rich are buying,
Sure.
that's held quite a bit. Austin's actually been hit harder than most, but it also spiked pretty high.
Yeah.
Housing prices went crazy in Austin. The big problem here is no new development is starting with interest rates where they're at.
Yeah.
So when we get to 25 and 26, you're going to have zero new supply coming online. You'll have some, but I'm virtually zero compared to a normal market. And so any dip in vacancy or rents right now is probably going to start shooting up as we get, a year and a half, 2 years in, because there's going to be no new supply. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question other than there's a lot of people moving in. There's still not a lot getting built.
Yeah.
We're absorbing what we can. And if we don't get interest rates in a place where the market can afford to start building again, you're going to have a few tough years ahead where you have no supply and a lot of people needing housing. And that's going to put inflationary pressure on prices to go back up again.
Yeah.
The real answer is, and it's unfortunate, and you saw it in the jobs report, you need less employment. I mean, it sucks to say that. The way you also cure some of this is killing jobs. If you want to squash inflation.
Yeah. Go more in depth on that. I don't think that's something that people hear often enough.
They don't hear it often enough. So when jobs are plentiful and everybody's making money and everybody can spend money, then the market stays going. And that means that apartments are full. That means houses are being bought. That means vacancy stays relatively low.
Yeah.
When you lose your job and you can't afford the apartment you used to, or you can't buy that house, it creates more vacancy in the market and more opportunity.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the way and right now we've been fighting inflation. One way to fight inflation is to take jobs out of the economy. I mean, it sucks to say that, but
Sure.
the less if I have a phone here and 100 people have jobs and 100 people can pay for it, prices stay high, they might go up.
Yeah.
If only 60 of those people now have jobs tomorrow, prices probably don't go up as quick. Maybe they go down. There's only 60 bidders for this phone.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sitting here saying I want anybody to lose their job. I'm not a macroeconomist, but that is one way that you deal with inflation is job control.
Yeah. Well, your phone is orange, so it's going to be extra valuable just right off the bat.
You might still have, the 40 people that lost their job might just go dig into savings to get this orange phone.
That's right. So let's talk about this lawsuit. So your company, Fort Capital, I guess there was an attempted extortion. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we're not.
Why don't you start? Give us an overview.
Yeah. So we're not in a lawsuit. I want to be clear about that. But we are working with law enforcement in what we believe is an extortion case. And so what I will say is we're dealing with a career criminal, a gentleman that we know who he is with 100% certainty, that lives up in Boulder, Colorado, named Jacob Kostecki.
Yep.
And he has been on X or Twitter for years creating. He's run multiple scams that he's been accused of and has court cases against him that have judgments that he has lost. And he's just a career criminal. This is what he does for sport. And he came back online and basically started an account that defamed myself and many others, and started with calling us, said we were going bankrupt, said we were frauds. I mean, went through a list of things that couldn't be more untrue, that we bought airplanes with investor dollars and that we forged document. I mean, the list goes on,
Yeah.
but he's a professional. He created a lot of fear in the market. And he kind of became the, hey, if you have a tip on somebody or whatever, email me guy. That account went very large. It got up to 22,000 followers. And so you can imagine when he's out tweeting, some of those tweets would go viral and
Sure.
couldn't be seen. And basically his whole play was pay me to go away.
Yeah.
Pay me a lot of money or I will destroy your family. I will destroy your reputation, your business. I will go after everything I can until I'm paid to go away.
Yeah.
And to the extent I can share that, what I can share is we're working close with the FBI. I know another party, it's public, so I can say it, that has filed a civil lawsuit on defamation. We're undecided if we're going to do that at this point. We are cooperating with law enforcement and continue, and I have every intention of pursuing this to the fullest. So one, it can't happen to us, but really he can't hurt other people. These things are very damaging. We live in a really weird world now where you can create an anonymous account and create a lot of harm to people. And I don't want to see him do that to us. And I certainly don't want to see him do it to other people.
Yeah. I mean, especially, going after your business, obviously you have clients and they have families and a lot of money is at play, but also your personal family. Like that's a difficult situation to be in for sure. But it sounds like you're going about it the right way. I apologize for calling it a lawsuit.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Some people think it is. Yeah, no, it's okay.
Okay. So, in this situation, a lot of people, and it sounds like he's a career criminal. So, if he's doing this, perhaps he's had success in the past. Someone said, okay, here's however much money, go away. Whether he went away or not, I'm not sure. I don't know the details of those past instances. What was your thought process going into this? Were you thinking, like, I'm not going to negotiate with this person, right? This is awful. Like I'm sure the desire is there for a lot of people. Like, I don't want to hurt. I don't want my family to get hurt. I don't want my business to get hurt. How did you approach that?
Yeah. So I'll say it started June 4th. I woke up, I was at breakfast. I walked out of breakfast and I had like 20 friends that had sent me a screenshot or a link to a tweet from this anonymous account that essentially said I was bankrupt. I couldn't pay my bills. All my investors were wiped out. And when I have a big account on Twitter and I've seen, people will say mean things occasionally. You learn to deal with it. And I just thought, oh, this will go away.
Yeah.
And that tweet was viewed a couple million times. And that was when we were off to the races. And so for the last 12 weeks, it's been steady pretty much every day, tweeting harmful things about me and others. They've tweeted about my family. They've tweeted about my church. They've tweeted, or I say he has tweeted about my church. He's tweeted about my business. He went way outside of just me, and then he started attacking my family. And so my mindset was, one, I hired an incredible team around. I had an incredible team, and I hired the right people around me, whether that was lawyers or people that were professionals in online cyber crimes. And so really early on, I just wanted to get educated. I knew that it takes 100 times more energy to fight a lie than to start a lie online. And I knew the plan for me was not to go fight a troll online, especially in public, because like you said, I have 50 plus employees. I have family and friends. I have a whole industry kind of watching in on this thing. And when I say it was not contained to just the little Twitter world. Everybody in my world eventually knew about this. I did not want to fight fire with fire, and I wanted to handle this with grace and as much humility as possible, which means I really had to stay silent and work in the background and hire the right people to kind of help me get there. But to answer your question I was never going to play into everything I was told would happen kind of happened. These professionals know exactly what they're doing. It's a business for them.
Yeah.
And so I did hire a private investigator, former law enforcement of 30 years. We were able to crack this case wide open through several different methods and confirm who we knew it was from the beginning. And then we just have to watch the law play out. And fortunately and unfortunately, these things move at the speed of government, and we've had a great people working on it. So they've done a great job thus far. I wish I could wake up every day and have this be done, but I think we're heading in the right direction. Like I said, I'm super grateful to all the people that have helped in this endeavor. It's been not how I wanted to spend my summer, but I think we'll be better for it, and we'll come out the other side of this, and people will know exactly the truth, which is it was all a lie.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly it's not fun in the moment, but at the end of the day, you're doing the right thing, obviously protecting yourself, but protecting potential future victims for sure.
Yep.
I just a couple questions. I want to be respectful of your time. But in this scenario, you know, you're grateful for the federal law enforcement, coming in. I want to ask, what's it like working with them? Not a lot of people have that opportunity to. Is it an opportunity? I don't know. Working with them in that capacity, but also if Twitter or X has, I don't know, assisted in any way. Are they sort of hands off? Like, what has their role been?
Yeah, Twitter and X. If you're listening to this and you work at Twitter, I love you guys. I've loved Twitter. I will say they have not been any help. It does not meet their harassment or defamation clause, which I don't know what harassment and defamation would be then. There was points in time where he was trying to sell the account to somebody else, and you're not allowed to sell accounts. There was no mention of that. So look, I'm all for free speech. I love Elon. I think what he's going to do with the platform is great, but they basically were like, this is free speech.
Yeah.
And to any listeners, as a reminder, is like an anonymous account is free speech. So they can say whatever they want. And you look at what is said about Elon every day on the platform, that Tesla is a Ponzi scheme, or, it's always these crazy things. But my answer to that, my only opinion on that is like, if you're the richest person in the world and you own multi-trillion-dollar companies, it's kind of table stakes that every day, all day, people are going to be bashing you online.
Of course.
But somebody explained it to me this way. You're so famous and so out there. It's like Donald Trump or Taylor Swift, or just name somebody that is at like the top of the world. It would be weird if you got online every day and didn't see that. So when people read it, they just kind of dismiss it. It doesn't really register.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you could have somebody that's a billionaire that nobody's ever heard of, and you could go say something bad about him online, and nobody would pay attention to it because they don't really know who the guy is. It's just not interesting.
Sure.
Twitter now and social media has created this kind of weird intersection where it's like you're well enough known that it's interesting if something's bad being said about you, but you're not well enough known that it would be like people would expect it. And so you're at this like perfect, if there was a Venn diagram of perfect target. And so, yes, you could say that said about Elon every day, it's free speech. I guess I wrap all that up by saying when you're going after a small business owner, a medium business owner, it impacts their world tremendously different, in my opinion. Yeah. That's my opinion. Obviously, I'm the victim here, so I'm speaking my own book, but I've talked to a lot of other people and learned a lot about how these things work online, and that seems to be the general narrative.
Yeah.
So X, it's free speech to them. So still on the platform, but it was disappointing. The second part, working with the FBI, to the extent I can share, it's been great. Like, one, I'm very grateful for them. There hasn't been enormous amount of interaction. We presented a very large case that we had built up all the evidence. We worked with them up front for them to review all the evidence. And once they had reviewed enough, they said, this is a case we'll take on. And then over the last few weeks that we've had a few phone calls here and there as we get more evidence in, and kind of working with them. So I would say it's fast moving, and then it's slow moving, and then it's fast moving and it's slow moving. We have multiple agents working on it, and that's really all I could say at this point.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Chris Powers, founder and CEO of Fort Capital and host of the Fort Podcast. I appreciate your expertise and all your everything that you've shared today. Is there links, websites, podcasts? I guess I said the name, but links and social media, all that stuff. You want to share that?
The Fort Podcast, you can follow me on Twitter at Fort Worth Chris, or you can go to our company's website, fort-companies.com.
Great. We'll put those links down in the description. Chris Powers, thank you so much.
Thank you.